invite all the children to come forward and sit on the blanket right here for a story, if you don't mind. Come on up, Una. Anybody else? Cleo? Good. Hey, Jules. Anybody else? Thank you very much. Madeline and Jude. All right. I want to start out with a question before I read the story. Who can tell me what a pageant is? What's a pageant? Anybody have an idea? I'll spell the word for you. P-A-G-E-A-N-T. Hey, Jemiah. Pageant. Any idea what it is? You ever heard of a pageant? Yes, ma'am. Different types, okay. Which one do you know of? Like a girl's pageant? Like a beauty pageant or something like that? Okay, there is definitely a beauty pageant. I don't know if you kids know this, but I once won a beauty pageant. It's hard to believe. I remembered it this morning and I got out my sash. It's the goodest looking Grand Poobah. It was a tremendous honor. There were thousands of us Grand Poobahs there. And let me put it on so you can see just how beautiful it was. I got a crown. It was just a wonderful ceremony. I remember specifically Donald Trump was hanging out backstage with us. It was just exciting, an exciting time for all of us. But that's a beauty pageant, and the pageant we're going to talk about this morning is a Christmas pageant, because a pageant, like a Christmas pageant, is when you reenact a story, historical or legendary or whatever. So everybody dresses up in costumes, and a Christmas pageant is when you reenact the Christmas story, like Ella and Josiah and Sebastian read to us this morning. So, start out. You have a tummy ache? Oh, I'm sorry. So you start out with people dressing up. You may have a barn, like they did in the story this morning, and you have a baby Jesus, and you have maybe kids or adults will dress up like Mary and Joseph. There's Mary, we'll put her right here. And you'll have Joseph right here. And then, because as you heard in the story this morning, they had to go to Bethlehem. There were no hospitals back then. There was no hotels with rooms open. And she goes into labor to have the baby, and there's no place but an old barn. So she has the baby out in the barn, and they wrap it up in cloths, and they put it in a manger. And a manger is just a feeding trough where you might throw some hay in so the cows can all walk over and eat the hay. So that's what's going on there. Meanwhile, as I think I don't know which one of you read the story, there were some shepherds watching their sheep at night. Sebastian, you're reading that part. An angel, according to the story, an angel appears to the shepherds and says, guess what? You're not going to believe what's going on over in Bethlehem. You should go check out this new baby that's being born. They said, what else have we got to do? Let's go. So they show up. Unfortunately, when I opened my nativity box this morning, the shepherds were missing. So I ran to the store. It's a little late to be buying shepherds right now. So I have 2 Elvis Presleys and a Batman. So we're going to just put these guys right here. And I didn't have any animals. Normally when you have one of these pageants, you have cows and sheep and things like maybe a goat. I went looking through the toy boxes in the youngest room. I have a moose, a cow, a penguin, and what is that, a triceratops? Triceratops. So we'll put these guys here. The one thing that we didn't read about today were wise men. There were these wise men, these wise guys from Staten Island. No, wise men. They were like astrologers. They studied the stars, and they noticed this big star up in the sky, and they said, we should go check that out because we think that's a sign of a new king being born. So these guys showed up. And there were 3 of them, and they all brought gifts because that's what you do when a baby's born. You bring a gift. They brought, there wasn't exactly a Babies R Us store back there. So they brought some gold, which just so you know, anytime you want to bring gold to me, I will take it. That's a wonderful gift to give. They also brought something called frankincense. Not Frankenstein, frankincense, which is a kind of perfume or an oil. And then they brought what? Myrrh. Myrrh is another kind of oil. You need a lot of oil because babies are stinky. So they brought frankincense and myrrh. By the way, being a grand poobah, I have a sort of a connection with Santa, and I know how much the story means to all of you. So tomorrow when you wake up and you go to open your presents, there's not going to be PlayStations or Xboxes, or instead there's going to be a lot of myrrh. Myrrh. You cannot have enough myrrh, right? Before we read our story, just one more thing about this story that we talk about in Sunday school, and so the parents know this too. At Judson Sunday School, we talk about how when we read Bible stories, we don't read them as history. We read them not as a representation of what really happened, but as a representation of how people felt about God. So, Sebastian, I'll ask you, because I know you've been in my class, and Charlotte too, how do people feel about God in those Old Testament stories about floods and the volcano in Sodom and Gomorrah? What did they think? They thought God was angry at them, right? Exactly. So, in the New Testament and in the Old Testament, they thought God was present in their lives, and they certainly saw God present in the life of Jesus. And when Jesus grew up, that was his whole message. The kingdom of God, God is present in your life and mine. Saying all that, yes ma'am. Oh, I'll read the story. The best Christmas pageant ever. I'll do my best to hold the pictures up for you, okay? This is The Best Christmas Pageant Ever by Barbara Robinson and Laura Cornell. There were 6 of them. Let me start on the right page. The Herdmans were the worst kids in the world. They lied and stole and played with matches. They were so awful, you could hardly believe they were real. There's one of them stabbing a snowman. Stabbing, yes. There were 6 of them: Ralph, Imogene, Leroy, Claude, Ollie, and Gladys. They were skinny and stringy-haired and dirty and all different sizes, with all different black and blue places where they had clonked each other. They lived over a garage, and when they didn't have anything else to do, they would bang the garage door up and down and try to squash each other, or the mailman, or their crazy one-eyed cat. Everybody stayed away from them. Then one day they showed up in Sunday school. They stole all the money out of the collection plate and drew mustaches on everybody in the Bible. Don't get any ideas. And though nobody knows how, they took over our annual Christmas pageant. Our Christmas pageant is always the same. Kids in bathrobes and bed sheets acting out the story of Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus being born. Everybody knows the story. Everybody but the Herdmans. That didn't stop them from picking out the best parts for themselves. "I'll be the Mary," Imogene yelled. "And Ralph, he'll be the Joseph." Everyone else was afraid to volunteer. That left 3 Herdmans, Leroy, Claude, and Ollie, to be wise men. And the worst Herdman of them all to be the angel of the Lord. "Me," Gladys hollered. "I'll be that." "What is it?" So then somebody had to read the whole story to them about the star and the shepherds, and how there was no room at the inn, and how the baby Jesus slept in a manger. The Herdmans were shocked. "They stuck them out in the barn?" Imogene yelled. "And they tied Jesus up in rags and put him in a feed box? At least we put Gladys in a bureau drawer." Then they heard about the wise men bringing gifts of oil and frankincense. Claude said, "What good is smelly oil? If we're the wise men, let's bring pizza." Every year, someone lent us their baby to be Jesus, but not this year. Nobody would trust a Herdman with their baby. So Imogene offered to steal one from the supermarket. There's always babies in carts there, she said. Let's forget about a baby, someone said. So we used a doll instead. Every rehearsal was an adventure. Leroy wanted to chase the mean innkeeper out of town, and Claude and Ollie wanted to run off with the baby Jesus to keep him safe. Imogene said she wouldn't name him Jesus. She would name him Bill. And she wouldn't let the wise men worship him. "Get away from that baby," she barked at them. "You might have germs." When Gladys found out the angel of the Lord appeared out of the nowhere in the black of night, she was sure it was out of Amazing Comics. "Shazam!" she yelled, smacking the kid next to her. Gladys liked to smack things. Our Mary was loud and bossy. The wise men were sneaky, and the angel of the Lord came from outer space. This was going to be the worst Christmas pageant ever. Some people wanted to cancel the whole thing. The minister said, "I don't think anyone will come to see it." But they were all wrong. Everybody came, just to see what the Herdmans would do. When the curtain opened, Ralph and Imogene stood in the wings, frozen. There's Ralph and Imogene. As if they weren't sure what to do. They weren't pushing or hitting or being Herdmans. The chorus waited and hummed and waited like an old refrigerator. When they finally came in, Imogene had slung the baby Jesus doll over her shoulder. Then she thumped it on the back twice, hard. There was a gasp. Didn't seem right to burp the baby Jesus. But that was the whole point of Jesus. He was a real person, and he started out as a real baby. His parents were real too, as real as Imogene, with her veil all crooked, and Ralph with his hair sticking out as if they had slept in their clothes out in the barn, just like in the real story. Then came Gladys from behind the shepherds, shoving him out of the way and stepping on everyone's feet. "Hey!" she yelled. "Unto you a child is born. He's in the barn." She made it sound like it was the best news in the world. Right behind Gladys came the wise men, but they didn't have the usual frankincense and gold and oil, and they didn't have a pizza. Instead, Leroy was carrying something big and heavy. It was a ham from the herdman's food basket. The church gave them one every year. The herdmans had never before given anything away except clonks on the head, so you had to be impressed. The herdmans were giving the baby Jesus their Christmas ham. Then the wise men were supposed to leave and go home, but instead they just sat down. Actually, it seemed like the right thing to do. After all, they had come a long way, and you wouldn't expect them to hand over the ham and leave. It seemed natural, too, to burp a baby who might be fussy or tired, to tell people where the baby was so they wouldn't wander all over the place looking for it. Somehow, every wrong move the herdmans made seemed right and natural. And then, as everyone sang Silent Night, Imogene started to cry. In the candlelight, her face was all shiny with tears, awful old Imogene, in her crookedy veil, crying as if Christmas had just come over her. When everyone left the church that night, it was cold and clear with crunchy snow underfoot and bright, bright stars in the sky. Everyone said there was something different this time, something special. And though nobody could say exactly what that something was, everyone agreed it was the best Christmas pageant ever. Merry Christmas. You can stay here and sing the next song or go back with your parents.